This is Carrot. Carrot's on a direct flight to Beijing because he's been learning Mandarin for 5 whole years now. But as soon as he lands, he's greeted by the aggressive Chinese border patrol. Border patrol demands for his passport. Carrot searches everywhere in his bag for it, but it's buried somewhere underneath all the airplane snacks that he stole. The longer he takes, the more annoyed the border patrol becomes. 快点儿！我告诉你，再不快点儿，这个 Venti? Is he talking about Starbucks? Is he asking if I want Starbucks at the airport? And that is how Carrot was introduced to the infamous Beijing accent.
酒糟鼻子赤红脸，光着膀子大裤衩，脚下一双踏拉板，茉莉花茶来一碗。
You might be thinking, okay, so Beijingers talk a little bit differently. So what? I mean, Southerners talk differently. Well, what if I told you that this accent is actually what's considered standard Mandarin by almost everyone? If that's true, why doesn't everyone speak this way? Why don't they teach this accent in schools or speak this way on TV? What makes the Beijing accent so hard to understand? For example, the Texas accent is not standard English, so we don't hear it everywhere. But the Beijing Mandarin is considered standard Mandarin, so why do we hear that everywhere? Why is what's considered standard Mandarin not used everywhere? There are a couple of characteristics that make the Beijing accent the famous Beijing accent. The first is pronunciation. Probably the most distinctive feature of Beijing accents is the use of erhua, the addition of an R sound at the end of a word. Basically, what that means is that Beijingers curl their tongue a lot. Get your head out of the gutter, it's not in the way you're thinking. Dirty, dirty, dirty. But they actually curl their tongues a lot. For example, the Mandarin you taught in school might teach you 帮我开个门 to ask someone to help you open the door. In Beijing, it ended up sounding a bit more like 帮我开个门. The sound at the end of men is what most people mean by erhua, but it's actually only one version of it. Another form of erhua that is heavily present in Beijing Hua is the use of R to replace certain words. Yes, literally replace. Say you want to tell someone, I told you. In the Mandarin word taught, you'd say, 我告诉你. Whereas in Beijing Hua, you hear something typically more like 我告诉你, completely taking out that su in 告诉 for R. Or if you want to say like, I don't know, like 不知道, like in everyday school Mandarin, you'd hear instead in Beijing, 不知道. Most of the time, the R sound adds a bit of a quirky twist to the accent, but if it gets really, really heavy, it kind of ends up sounding like you're in an audition for the next Pirates of the Caribbean movie. Something that also gets people unfamiliar with Beijing Hua is the amount of slang that they use. If you ask someone outside of Beijing what 第二了, they probably scratch their heads a little bit. Well, Beijingers use this phrase to mock someone who's left to run away. It's a phrase that requires context and humor to use without sounding awkward or just plain stupid. Have you ever seen an adult try and use slang? Hey son, your dad's about to go whiz up some girls. You wanna come? Ugh, ew dad, like do not talk like that. Same thing goes with a lot of Beijing slang. Language environment is so crucial to understanding and using Beijing slang effectively, which would be difficult for someone who hasn't been in that environment before. So given all these nuances, why is Beijing Hua considered standard Mandarin, yet it's so hard to understand for so many people, even in China? Well, it's because of the way standard Mandarin was developed. Beijing has been the political and cultural center of China for centuries. Being a place with such a massive historical and cultural significance, it made sense that how things were said in Beijing would be what's called the lingua franca. In other words, like the common language for the rest of China due to just the sheer political sway Beijing had. And so while the original pronunciation standards might have been based on the local Beijing dialect, this wouldn't stand forever. As with any other language, terminology, slang, and speech patterns are all influenced by the time and place that they take place in. We can see this in English too. I mean, you don't hear anyone in present day talking in the transatlantic accent anymore.
Don't tell me you've forsaken your beloved whiskey and whiskies.
Harriet Brown, of course. I suppose I'll have to see her.
Nor do you see people in the past talking about their drip after getting a suit fitting. Mandarin was no different. And so while it was heavily based on Beijing Hua in the beginning, just over time, as people adjusted, different dialects influenced how people said things, and a new standard for what is normal sounding became established. And so while it's called what's standard, that standard is actually based off of a very small portion of mainland China. Like for instance, Cantonese speakers, we can't say an R sound. Like I try to teach my mom it's ren for people, but she says yen, because in Cantonese we say the R becomes a Y, so we say yan. There's no actual R like that in Cantonese, and so Most Cantonese people can't make that sound. And so it's the same with other dialects, other places. And so most people couldn't make all the sounds of the original Mandarin that was standard. And so because the original Mandarin speakers actually were a small percentage of people, the new norm became something entirely different, even though what's considered standard was in that small place. If you want to watch another video on Chinese culture and language, click over here. And if you're a Cantonese speaker and you want to learn Mandarin, click over here because this one might help you out so that when you go to Beijing, you can interact with people.